Hello, how we doing? Welcome in, everybody. Holy cow, you're all piling in early. I love it. I really think you guys are going to enjoy tonight. Well, hey, over there on the tubes. Sunshine. Awesome. It's nice to know you're over there, too. I just got into bed. Yeah, this is going to be a fun night. I have something special because I don't do enough of these, and yeah, I'm doing all right. Upright and mobile, as I like to say. So the two books that will be the two stories that we'll be reading tonight are both ghost stories. They are ghost stories that were written in the 19th century, and the authors may not be who you might think. Eating sushi. Nice. Here I am. I am here. You did not miss Storytime. Read, I bleed. I don't know how scary they are, but they are definitely classic Victorian ghost stories, which aren't always hugely scary, but they just have that ghost vibe to them, which is really cool. And I'm excited to show you guys, to read these two stories to you. And then I've got another story, full-length story on Friday that I want to read. So hopefully you guys will like these stories so that you can come back on Friday and listen to a full night. So that's all right. Sunshine, you are not the only person that falls asleep to my lives. Hey, Kelly Kel, I am having a wonderful night. No, these should not bring you nightmares. These are not nightmare level books, nightmare level stories. Stephen King, will get you there, but yeah. Hello, Jules. How are you? Oops. Be breaking stuff over here. So we've reached the halfway point. How's everybody's week going? The cat's awake at 4 a.m. Yeah. Hey there, Rambo. Welcome in. Hey, Deborah. Eddie. Welcome in, brother. How are you? Sarah, I totally understand. This funny thing about doing this kind of work and being outside of a 9-to-5 job, regular 9-to-5 job, like sometimes I wake up and I don't know what day it is because I'm not in a regular routine. So it's Um, I will show you. Actually, I'll probably show you guys here in a few minutes. So, because I work on Sundays, I work on Saturdays, I work, whatever day I have time, I sit down and I'll work on an audiobook that I'm working on, or I'll record a piece of content for, like a poetry reading or whatnot. Or I'll work on planning my live streams. So, yeah, it's weird not having a regular job because, sometimes I don't know what day it is. It's kind of funny. So, I do have a couple of things. Hey, Linda, how are you? Timothy, yeah, that's not a bad idea. Casey, James and the Giant Peach was a blast to read. It was so much fun. The characters were wonderful. Trying to find ways to differentiate each of those voices. And then when I was completely and utterly foolish and decided to do it by accents, and just they were all over the place. But that's, I think, part of what made it so much fun. Nice. Well, I'm glad you were able to finish it. Yeah, I leave them up on the tubes because I don't have a huge following over there, so thank you. So it's not a huge deal. If YouTube flags them, then I'll take them down. But, yeah, those poor seagulls. BFG is definitely on my list, as well as Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, Matilda. Roald Dahl was just wonderful, so I'm glad you enjoyed it. It was making me laugh. I was just trying to figure it out, But I will give you guys a hint as to what I am doing. Jim Jam. Ralph S. Mouse. I did do Mouse and the Motorcycle a couple of months ago. And that was fun. That was a lot of fun. Well, so I had decided when I hit 15,000, I was going to do a special launch that a lot of you have been asking for. And just to give you a hint of it, Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I haven't finalized the designs yet. I know there will be a couple of different ones. Like I was looking at doing like a mug, like a coffee mug that has the face on the one side and then Storytime with UndeadPapa on the other side. I was planning on doing a sticker. I was also planning on doing a design like this one. So yeah, so that's what I was thinking about. So I haven't decided which site I'll be using to sell them. I did. It's not active currently, but I do have. Oh, Eddie, it's my logo on a t-shirt, which is, yeah. But I've got some ideas and stuff. Magnets are easy, so are stickers, t-shirts, hoodies, things like that. I know a couple people have requested tank tops, things like that. So, all right. Well, oh boy, it's past start time. Let's get going here. See, it's what happens. I get to talking and can't get me to shut up. All right. Yeah, so there's some different options. I might do some voting during the lives to see what people might want. We'll go from there. But all right, well, thank you guys for being here and for all the likes already. Holy cow! Shares and likes help get me in front of more people's, which is great. We had really 2 wonderful nights where I gained almost 1,300 followers in 2 nights, which is just astounding. Was really wonderful, and you guys helped make that happen, and I really appreciate it. I really do. So let's just have another good night, read some great stories, and we'll go from there. All right. Hey, Songbird, I didn't see you sneak in here. Still D1. I'm not even sure what that means. Hey, Crazy Mama, welcome. You are just in, like, skin of your teeth on time. I'm just about to start. Well, good evening, everyone. Oh yeah, I don't even know. It's ratings on TikTok. The algorithm doesn't know what to do with me, I think, because there's really not a whole lot of people doing this type of thing. So time for you to do the dishes. Yeah, that's awesome. You have not missed a thing. So, well, thank you. Well, let's get started. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to UndeadPapa. Tonight, we have 2 ghost stories written by 2 remarkable women whose tales of the supernatural have endured for more than a century. Stories of warnings, omens, and journeys that begin in the ordinary world before leading somewhere far stranger. We begin tonight with a cry in the darkness, a sound feared for generations, and a warning that may already be too late. So wherever you're listening from, dim the lights, sit back, and relax, because story time is about to begin. This is The Banshee's Warning by Charlotte Riddell. Just to give you an idea, this short story was first published in 1867. Many a year before chloroform was thought of, there lived in an old rambling house on Gerrard Street, Soho, a clever Irishman called Hertford O'Donnell. After Hertford O'Donnell, he was entitled to write M.R.C.S., for he had studied hard to gain this distinction. The older surgeons at Guy's, his hospital, considered him one of the most rising operators of the day. Having said chloroform was unknown at the time this story opens, it will strike my readers that if Hertford O'Donnell were a rising and successful operator in those days, of necessity he combined within himself a larger number of striking qualities than there are by any means necessary to form a successful operator in these. There was more than mere hand skill. more than even thorough knowledge of his profession, than needful for the man, who, dealing with conscious subjects, essayed to rid them of some of the diseases to which flesh is heir. There was great courage required in the manipulator of old than is altogether essential at present. Then, as now, a thorough mastery of his instruments, a steady hand, a keen eye, a quick dexterity were indispensable to a good operator. But, added to all these things, were formerly required a pulse which knew no quickening, a mental strength which never faltered, a ready power of adaptation in unexpected circumstances, fertility of resource in difficult cases, and a brave front under all emergencies. If I refrain from adding that a hard as well as a courageous heart was an important item in the program, it is only out of deference to general opinion, which, amongst other strange delusions, clings to the belief that courage and hardness are antagonistic qualities. Hertford O'Donnell, however, was hard as steel. He understood his work, and he did it thoroughly. But he cared no more for quivering nerves and shrinking muscles, for screams of agony, for faces white with pain and teeth clenched in the extremity of anguish, than he did for the stony countenances of the dead, which so often in the dissecting room appalled younger and less experienced men. He had no sentiment, and he had no sympathy. The human body was to him merely an ingenious piece of mechanism, which it was at once a pleasure and a profit to understand. Precisely as Brunel loved the Thames Tunnel or any other singular engineering feat, so O'Donnell loved a patient on whom he had operated successfully, more especially if the ailment possessed by the patient were of a rare and difficult character. And for this reason he was much liked by all who came under his hands. Since patients are apt to make a surgeon's interest in their cases for interest in themselves, and it was gratifying to John Dix, plasterer, and Timothy Regan, laborer, to be the happy possessors of remarkable diseases, which produced a cordial understanding between them and the handsome Irishman. If he had been hard and cool at the moment of hacking them to pieces, that was all forgotten or remembered only as virtue when, after being discharged from hospital like soldiers who had served in a severe campaign, they met Mr. O'Donnell in the street, and were accosted by that rising individual just as though he considered himself nobody. He had a royal memory, this stranger in a strange land, both for faces and cases, and like the rest of his countrymen, he never felt it beneath his dignity to talk cordially to Corduroy and Fustian. In London, as in Calgillin, he never held back his tongue from speaking a cheery or kindly word. His manners were pliable enough, if his heart were not. And the porters and the patients and the nurses and the students at Guy's were all pleased to see Hertford O'Donnell. Rain, hail, sunshine, it was all the same. There was a life and a brightness about the man which communicated itself to those whom he came in contact. Let the mud in the Borough be a foot deep or the London fog as thick as pea soup, Mr. O'Donnell never lost his temper, never muttered a surly reply to the gatekeeper's salutation, but spoke out blithely and cheerfully to his pupils and his patients, to the sick and to the well, to those below and to those above him. And yet Spite of all these good qualities, spite of his handsome face, his fine figure, his easy address, and his unquestionable skill as an operator, the dons who acknowledged his talent shook their heads gravely when 2 or 3 of them in private and solemn conclave talked confidentially of their younger brother. If there were many things in his favor, there were more in his disfavor. He was Irish, not merely by the accident of birth, which might have been forgiven since a man cannot be held accountable for such caprices of nature, but by every other accident and design which is objectionable to the orthodox and respectable and representative English mind. In speech, appearance, manner, taste, modes of expression, habits of life, Hertford O'Donnell was Irish. To the core of his heart, he loved the island which he declared he never meant to revisit, and amongst the English he moved to all intents and purposes a foreigner, who was resolved, so said the great prophets at Guy's, to rush to destruction as fast as he could, and let no man hinder him. He means to go to the whole length of his tether, observed one of the ancient wiseacres to another, which speech implied a conviction that Hertford O'Donnell, having sold himself to the evil one, had determined to dive the full length of his rope into wickedness before being pulled to that shore where even wickedness is negative, where there are no mad carouses, no wild, sinful excitements, nothing but impotent wailing and gnashing of teeth. A reckless, graceless, clever, wicked devil, going to his natural home as fast as in London anyone possibly speed thither. This was the opinion his superiors held of the man who lived all alone with a housekeeper and her husband, who also acted as butler, in his big house near Soho. Gerrard Street, made famous by De Quincey, was not then an utterly shady and forgotten locality. Carriage patients found their way to the rising young surgeon. Some great personages thought it not beneath them to fee an individual whose consulting rooms were situated on what was even then considered the wrong side of Regent Street. He was making money, and he was spending it. He was over head and ears in debt, useless, vulgar debt, senselessly contracted, never bravely faced. He had lived at an awful pace ever since he came to London, a pace which only a man who hopes and expects to die young can ever travel. Life was good, was it? Death, he was a child, or a woman, or a coward, to be afraid of that hereafter. God knew all about the trifle which had upset his coach, better than the dons at Guy's. Hertford O'Donnell understood the world pretty thoroughly, and the ways thereof were to him as reeds often traversed. Therefore, when he said that at the day of judgment he felt certain he should come off as well as many of those who censured him, it may be assumed that, although his views of post-mortem punishment were vague, unsatisfactory, and infidel, still his information as to the peccadilloes of his neighbors was such as consoled himself. And yet, living all alone in the old house near Soho Square, grave thoughts would intrude into the surgeon's mind, thoughts which were, so to say, italicized by peremptory letters, and still more peremptory visits from people who wanted money. Although he had many acquaintances, he had no single friend, and accordingly these thoughts were received and brooded over in solitude. In those hours when, after returning from dinner or supper or congenial carouse, he sat in his dreary rooms, smoking his pipe and considering means and ways, chances and certainties. In good truth, he had started in London with some vague idea that, as his life in it would not be of long continuance, the pace at which he elected to travel could be of little consequence. but the years since his first entry into the metropolis were now piled one on top of another. His youth was behind him, his chances of longevity, spite of the way he had striven to injure his constitution, quite as good as ever. He had come to that period in existence, to that narrow strip of tableland whence the ascent of youth and the descent of age are equally discernible. When, simply because he has lived for so many years, it strikes a man as possible he may have to live for just as many more, with the ability for hard work gone, with the boon companions scattered, with the capacity for enjoying convivial meetings and a mere memory, with small means perhaps, with no bright hopes, with the pomp and the circumstance and the fairy carriages and the glamour which youth flings over earthly objects, faded away like the pageant of yesterday, while the dreary ceremony of living has to be gone through today and tomorrow and the morrow after, as though the gay cavalcade and the martial music and the glittering helmets and the prancing steeds were still accompanying the wayfarer to his journey's end. Ah, my friends, there comes a moment when we must all leave the coach, with its 4 bright bays, its pleasant outside freight, its cheery company, its guard who blows the horn so merrily through villages and along lonely country roads. Long before we reach that final stage where the black business claims us for its own special property, we have to bid goodbye to all easy, thoughtless journeying, and betake ourselves with what zest we may to traversing the common of reality. There is no royal road across it that I heard of. From the king on his throne to the laborer who vaguely imagines what manner of being a king is, we have all to tramp across that desert at one period of our lives. At all events, and that period usually is when, as I have said, a man starts to find the hopes and the strength and the buoyancy of youth left behind, while years and years of life lie stretching out before him. The coach he has traveled by drops him here. There is no appeal. There is no help. Therefore let him take off his hat and wish the new passengers good speed, without either envy or repining. Behold, he has had his turn, and let whosoever will mount on the box seat of life again, and tip the coachman and handle the ribbons, he shall take that pleasant journey no more forever. Even supposing a man's springtime to have been a cold and ungenial one, with bitter easterly winds and nipping frosts, biting the buds and retarding the blossoms, still it was spring for all that. Spring with the young green leaves sprouting forth, with the flowers unfolding tenderly, with the songs of the birds and the rush of waters, with the summer before and the autumn afar off, and winter remote as death and eternity. But when once the trees have donned their summer foliage, when the pure white blossoms have disappeared, and the gorgeous red and orange and purple blaze of many-colored flowers fills the gardens, then, if there come a wet, dreary day, the idea of autumn and winter is not so difficult to realize. When once 12 o'clock is reached, the evening and night become facts, not possibilities, and it was of the afternoon and the evening and the night Hertford O'Donnell sat thinking on Christmas Eve, when I crave permission to introduce him to my readers. A good-looking man, ladies considered him, a tall, dark-complexioned, black-haired, straight-limbed, deeply, divinely blue-eyed fellow, with a soft voice, with a pleasant brogue, who had ridden like a centaur over the loose stone walls on Connemara, who had danced all night at the Dublin balls, who had walked across the Benabula mountains, gun in hand, day after day, without weariness, who had fished in every one of the 100 lakes you can behold from the top of that mountain near Recess Hotel, who had led a mad, wild life in Trinity College, and a wilder perhaps while studying for a doctor, as the Irish phrase goes, in Edinburgh, and who, after the death of his eldest brother, left him free to return to Calgillan and pursue the usual utterly useless, utterly purposeless, utterly pleasant life of an Irish gentleman possessed of health, birth, and expectations, suddenly kicked over the paternal traces, bade adieu to Calgillan Castle and the blandishments of a certain beautiful Miss Clifton, beloved of his mother, and laid out to be his wife, walked down the avenue without even so much company as a gossoon to carry his carpet-bag, shook the dust from his feet at the edge of the lodge gates, and took his seat on the coach, never once looking back at Calgillan, where his favourite mare was standing in the stable, his greyhounds chasing one another round the home paddock, his gun at half-cock in his dressing-room, and his fishing tackle all in order and ready to use. He had not kissed his mother or asked for his father's blessing. He left Miss Clifton arrayed in her brand-new riding habit without a word of affection or regret. He had spoken no syllable of farewell to any servant about the place. Only when the old woman at the lodge bade him good morning and God blessed his handsome face, he recommended her bitterly to look at it well, for she would never see it more. 12 years and a half had passed since then, without either Miss Clifton or any other one of the Calgillan people having set eyes on Master Hertford's handsome face. He had kept his vow to himself. He had not written home. He had not been indebted to mother or father for even a 10-penny piece during the whole of that time. He had lived without friends, and he had lived without God, so far as God ever lets a man live without him. One thing only he felt to be needful: money. Money to keep him in the evil days of sickness, or age, or loss of practice came upon him. Though a spendthrift, he was not a simpleton. Around him he saw men who, having started with fairer prospects than his own, were nevertheless reduced to indigence, and he knew that what had happened to others might happen to himself. An unlucky cut, slipping on a piece of orange peel in the street, the merest accident imaginable, is sufficient to change opulence to beggary in the life's program of an individual, whose income depends on eye, on nerve, on hand, and besides the consciousness of this fact, Hertford O'Donnell knew that beyond a certain point in his profession, progress was not easy. It did not depend quite on the strength of his own bow and shield, whether he counted his earnings by hundreds or thousands. Work may achieve competence, but mere work cannot, in a profession, at all events, compass fortune. He looked around him, and he perceived that the majority of great men, great and wealthy, had been indebted for their elevation more to the accident of birth, patronage, connection, or marriage than to personal ability. Personal ability, no doubt, they possessed, but then little Jones, who lived in Frith Street, and who barely kept himself and his wife and family, had ability to, only he lacked the concomitants of success. He wanted something or someone to puff him into notoriety, a brother at court, a lord's leg to mend, a rich wife to give him prestige in society, and in his absence of this something or someone, he had grown gray-haired and faint-hearted while laboring for a world which utterly despises its most obsequious servants. clatter along the streets with a pair of fine horses, snub the middle class, and drive over the commonalty, that is the way to compass wealth and popularity in England, said Hertford O'Donnell bitterly. And as the man desired wealth and popularity, he sat before his fire, with a foot on each hob, and a short pipe in his mouth, considering how he might best obtain the means to clatter along the streets in his carriage, and splash plebeians with mud from his wheels like the best. In Dublin he could, by means of his name and connection, have done well, but then he was not in Dublin, neither did he want to be. The bitterest memories of his life were inseparable from the very name of the Green Island, and he had no desire to return to it. Besides, in Dublin heiresses are not quite so plentiful as in London, and an heiress, Hertford O'Donnell had decided, would do more for him than years of steady work. A rich wife could clear him of debt, introduce him to fashionable practice, afford him that measure of social respectability which a medical bachelor invariably lacks, deliver him from the loneliness of Gerrard Street and the domination of Mr. and Mrs. Coles. To most men, deliberately bartering away their independence for money seems so prosaic a business that they strive to gloss it over, even to themselves, and to assign every reason for their choice, save that which is really the influencing one. Not so, however, with Hertford O'Donnell. He sat beside the fire, scoffing over his proposed bargain, thinking of the lady's age, her money-bags, her desirable house in town, her seat in the country, her snobbishness, her folly. "It could be a fitting ending," he sneered, "and why I did not settle for the matter tonight passes my comprehension. I am not a fool, to be frightened with old women's tales, and yet I must have turned white. I felt I did, and she asked me whether I were ill. And then to think of my being such an idiot as to ask her if she had heard anything like a cry, as though she would be likely to hear that. She, with her poor parvenu blood, which I often imagine must have been mixed with some of her father's strong pickling vinegar. What a deuce could I have been dreaming about? I wonder what it really was." And Hertford O'Donnell pushed his hair back off his forehead and looked another draught from the too similar tumbler, which was placed conveniently on the chimney-piece. "After expressly making up my mind to propose, too," he mentally continued. "It could have been conscience, that myth which somebody who knew nothing about the matter said, makes cowards of us all. I don't believe in conscience, and even if there be such a thing capable of being developed by sentiment and cultivation, why should it trouble me? I have no intention of wronging Miss Janice Price Ingot, not the least. Honestly and fairly I shall marry her. Honestly and fairly I shall act by her. An old wife is not exactly an ornamental article of furniture in a man's house, and I do not know that the fact of her being well gilded makes her look any handsomer. But she shall have no cause for complaint, and I will go and dine with her tomorrow and settle the matter." Having arrived at which resolution, Mr. O'Donnell arose, kicked down the fire, burning hollow, with the heel of his boot, knocked the ashes out of his pipe, emptied his tumbler, and bethought him it was time to go to bed. He was not in the habit of taking his rest so early as 11:45, but he felt unusually weary, tired mentally and bodily, and lonely beyond all power of expression. "The fair Janet would be better than this," he said, half aloud, and then, with a start and a shiver and a blanched face, he turned sharply around, whilst a low, sobbing, wailing cry echoed mournfully through the room. No form of words could give an idea of the sound. The plaintiveness of the Aeolian harp, that plaintiveness which so soon affects and lowers the highest spirits, would have seemed wildly gay in comparison with the sadness of the cry which seemed floating in the air. As the summer wind comes and goes amongst the trees, so that mournful wail came and went, came and went. It came in a rush of sound like a gradual crescendo managed by a skilful musician, and died away in a lingering note, so gently that the listener could scarcely tell the exact moment when it faded into utter silence. I say faded, for it disappeared as the coastline disappears in the twilight, and there was total stillness in the apartment. Then, for the first time, Hertford O'Donnell looked at his dog, and beholding the creature crouched into a corner beside the fireplace, called upon him to come out. His voice sounded strange even to himself, and apparently the dog thought so too, for he made no effort to obey the summons. "Come here, sir," his master repeated, and then the animal came crawling reluctantly forward with his hair on end, his eyes almost starting from his head, trembling violently as the surgeon who caressed him felt. "So you heard it, Brian," he said to the dog, "and so your ears are sharper than Miss Ingett's, old fellow. It's a mighty queer thing to think of, being favored with a visit from a banshee in Gerrard Street. And as the lady has travelled so far, I only wish to know whether there is any sort of refreshment she would like to take after her long journey." He spoke loudly and with a certain mocking defiance, seeming to think the phantom he addressed would reply. But when he stopped at the end of his sentence, no sound came through the stillness. There was a dead silence in the room, a silence broken only by the falling of cinders on the hearth and the breathing of his dog. "If my visitor would tell me," he proceeded, "for whom this lamentation is being made, whether for myself or for some member of my illustrious family, I should feel immensely obliged. It seems too much honor for a poor surgeon to have such attention paid him. Good heavens, what is that?" he exclaimed, as a ring, loud and peremptory, woke all the echoes in the house, and brought his housekeeper, in a state of distressing dishabille, out of her warm bed, as she subsequently stated, to the head of the staircase. Across the hall Hertford O'Donnell strode, relieved at the prospect of speaking to any living being. He took no precaution of putting up the chain, but flung the door wide. A dozen burglars, who would have proved welcome in comparison with that ghostly intruder he had been interviewing, therefore, as has been said, he threw the door wide, admitting a rush of wet, cold air, which made poor Mrs. Cole's few remaining teeth chatter in her head. "Who's there? What do you want?" asked the surgeon, seeing no person and hearing no voice. "Who is there? Why the devil can't you speak?" When this polite exhortation failed to elicit an answer, he passed out into the night and looked up the street and down the street, to see nothing but the driving rain and the blinking lights. "If this goes on much longer, I shall soon think I must be either mad or drunk," he muttered as he re-entered the house and locked and bolted the door once more. "Lord's sake, what is the matter, sir?" asked Mrs. Coles from the upper flight, carefully only to reveal the borders of her nightcap to Mr. O'Donnell's admiring gaze. "Is anybody killed? Have you to go out, sir?" "It was only a runaway ring," he answered, trying to reassure himself with an explanation he did not in his heart believe. "Run away! I'd run away them," murmured Mrs. Coles, as she retired to the conjugal couch, where Coles was, to quote her own expression, snoring like a pig through it all. Almost immediately afterwards, she heard her master ascend the stairs and close his bedroom door. "Madam will surely be too much of a gentlewoman to intrude here," thought the surgeon, scoffing even at his own fears. But when he lay down, he did not put out his light, and made Brian leap up and crouch on the coverlet beside him. The man was fairly frightened, and would have thought it no discredit to his manhood to acknowledge as much. He was not afraid of death. He was not afraid of trouble. He was not afraid of danger. But he was afraid of the banshee. And as he lay with his hand on the dog's head, he recalled many stories. He recalled the many stories he had been told concerning this family retainer in the days of his youth. He had not thought about her for years and years. Never before had he heard her voice himself. When his brother died, she had not thought it necessary to travel up to Dublin and give him notice of the impending catastrophe. If she had, I would have gone down to Calgillan and perhaps saved his life, considered the surgeon. I wonder who this is for. If for me, that will settle my debts and my marriage. If I could be quite certain it was either of the old people, I would start tomorrow. Then, vaguely, his mind wandered on to think of every banshee story he had ever heard in his life. About the beautiful lady with the wreath of flowers who sat in the rocks below Redcastle, in the country Antrim, crying till one of the sons died for love of her. About the round chamber at Dunluce, which was swept clean by the banshee every night. About the bed in a certain great house in Ireland, which was slept in constantly, although no human being ever passed in or out after dark. About that general officer who, the night before Waterloo, said to a friend, "I have heard the banshee, and shall not come off this field alive tomorrow. Break the news gently to poor Carey," and who, nevertheless, coming safe off the field, had subsequently news about poor Carey broken tenderly and pitifully to him, about the lad who, aloft in the rigging, hearing the night of a sobbing, wailing coming over the waters, went down to the captain and told him he was afraid they were somehow out of their reckoning just in time to save the ship, which, when morning broke, they found, but for his warning, would have been on the rocks. It was blowing great guns, and the sea was all in a fret and turmoil, and they could sometimes see in the trough of the waves, as down a valley, the cruel black reefs they had escaped. On deck, the captain stood speaking to the boy who had saved them, and asking how he knew of their danger, and when the lad told him, the captain laughed, and said her ladyship had been outwitted that time. But the boy answered and gave... excuse me. Whew. But the boy answered, with a grave shake of his head, that the warning was either for him or his, and that if he got safe to port, there would be bad tidings waiting for him from home. Whereupon the captain bade him go below and get some brandy and lie down. He got the brandy, and he lay down, but he never rose again. And when the storm abated, when a great calm succeeded to the previous tempest, there was a very solemn funeral at sea. And on their arrival at Liverpool, the captain took a journey to Ireland to tell a widowed mother how her only son died, and to bear his few effects to the poor, desolate soul. And Hertford O'Donnell thought again about his own father riding full chase across the country, and hearing as he galloped by a clump of plantation something like a sobbing and wailing. Excuse me. The hounds were in full cry, but he still felt, as he afterwards expressed it, that there was something among those trees he could not pass, and so he jumped off his horse and hung the reins over the branch of a Scotch fir, and beat the cover well, but not a thing he could find in it. Then, for the first time in his life, I am not tired, I swear. And then, for the first time in his life, Miles O'Donnell turned his horse's head from the hunt, and within a mile of Calgillan met a man running to tell him his brother's gun had burst and injured him mortally. And he remembered the story also of how Mary O'Donnell, his great-aunt, being married to a young Englishman, heard the banshee as she sat one evening waiting for his return, and of how she, thinking the bridge by which he often came home unsafe for horse and man, went out in a great panic to meet and entreat him to go round by the main road for her sake. Sir Edward was riding along in the moonlight, making straight for the bridge, when he beheld a figure dressed all in white, crossing it. Then there was a crash, and the figure disappeared. The lady was rescued and brought back to the hall, but next morning there were 2 dead bodies within its walls, those of Lady Ayrton and her stillborn son. Quicker than I write them, these memories chased one another through Hertford O'Donnell's brain, and there was only one more terrible memory than any which would recur to him concerning an Irish nobleman who, seated alone in his great townhouse in London, heard the banshee and rushed out to get rid of the phantom, which wailed in his ear nevertheless as he strode down Piccadilly. And then the surgeon remembered how that nobleman went with a friend to the opera, feeling sure that there no banshee, unless she had a box, could find admittance, until suddenly he heard her singing up amongst the highest part of the scenery with a terrible mournfulness, and a pathos which made the prima donna's tenderest notes seem harsh by comparison. As he came out, some quarrel arose between him and a famous fire-eater, against whom he stumbled, and the result was that the next afternoon there was a new Vice-Lord, killed in a duel with Captain Bravo. Memories like these are not the most enlivening possible. They are apt to make a man fanciful and nervous and wakeful, but as time ran on, Hertford O'Donnell fell asleep, with his candle still burning and Brian's cold nose pressed against his hand. He dreamt of his mother's family, the Hertfords of Artingbury, Yorkshire, far-off relatives of Lord Hertford, so far off that even Mrs. O'Donnell held no clue to the genealogical maze. He thought he was at Artingbury, fishing, that it was a misty summer morning and the fish rising beautifully. In his dreams he hooked one after another, and the boy who was with him threw them into the basket. At last there was one more difficult to land than the others, and the boy, in his eagerness to watch the sport, drew nearer and nearer to the brink, while the fisher, intent on his prey, failed to notice his companion's danger. Suddenly there was a cry, a splash, and the boy disappeared from sight. Next instant he rose again, however, and then, for the first time, Hertford O'Donnell saw his face. It was one he knew well. In a moment he plunged into the water and struck out for the lad. He had him by the hair, and he was turning to bring him back to the land, when the stream suddenly changed into a wide, shoreless sea, where the billows were chasing one another with mad, demonic mirth. For a while, O'Donnell kept the lad and himself afloat. They were swept under the waves and came up again, only to see larger waves rushing toward them. But through all, the surgeon never loosened his hold, until a tremendous billow, engulfing them both, tore the boy from his grasp. With the horror of his dream upon him, he awoke to hear a voice quite distinctly. "Go to the hospital. Go at once." The surgeon started up in bed, rubbing his eyes, and looked around. The candle was flickering faintly in its socket. Brian, with his ears pricked forward, had raised his head at his master's sudden movement. Everything was quiet, but still those words were ringing in his ear. "Go to the hospital. Go at once." The tremendous peal of the bell overnight and this sentence seemed to be simultaneous. That he was wanted at Guy's, wanted imperatively, came to O'Donnell like an inspiration. Neither sense nor reason had anything to do with the conviction that roused him out of bed and made him dress as speedily as possible and grope his way down the staircase, Brian following. He opened the front door and passed out into the darkness. The rain was over, and the stars were shining as he pursued his way down Newport Market, and thence winding in and out in a southeasterly direction through Lincoln's Inn Fields and Old Square to Chancery Lane, whence he proceeded to St. Paul's. Along the deserted streets he resolutely continued his walk. He did not know what he was going to Guy's for. Some instinct was urging him on, and he neither strove to combat nor control it. Only once did the thought of turning back cross his mind, and that was the archway leading into Old Square. There he had paused for a moment, asking himself whether he were not gone stark staring mad. But Guy's seemed preferable to the haunted house on Gerrard Street, and he walked resolutely on, determined to say, if any surprise were expressed at his appearance, that he had been sent for. Sent for? Yea, truly, but by whom? On through Cannon Street, on over London Bridge, where the lights flickered in the river and the sullen splash of the water flowing beneath the arches, washing the stone piers, could be heard. Now the human din was hushed and lulled to sleep. On thinking of many things, of the days of his youth, of his dead brother, of his father's heavily encumbered estate, of the fortune his mother had vowed she would leave to some charity rather than to him, if he refused to marry according to her choice, of his wild life in London, of the terrible cry he had heard overnight, that unearthly wail which he could not drive from his memory, even when he entered Guy's and confronted the porter, who said, "You have been sent for, sir. Did you not meet the messenger?" Like one in a dream, Hertford O'Donnell heard him. Like one in a dream, also, he asked what was the matter. "Bad accident, sir. Fire. Fell off a balcony. Unsafe old building. Mother and child. A son. Child with compound fracture of thigh." This, the joint information of porter and house surgeon mingled together, made a boom in Mr. O'Donnell's ears like the sound of the sea breaking on a shingly shore. Only one sentence he understood properly. Immediate amputation necessary. At this point he grew cold. He was the careful, cautious, successful surgeon in a moment. "The child, you say?" he answered. "Let me see him." The Guy's hospital of today may be different to the Guy's Hertford O'Donnell knew so well. Railways have, I believe, swept away the old operating room. Railways may have changed the position of the former accident ward, to reach which, in the days of which I am writing, the two surgeons had to pass a staircase leading to the upper stories. On the lower step of this staircase, partially in shadow, Hertford O'Donnell beheld, as he came forward, an old woman seated. An old woman with streaming gray hair, with attenuated arms, with head bowed forward, with scanty clothing, with bare feet, who never looked up at their approach, but sat unnoticing, shaking her head and wringing her hands in an extremity of despair. "Who is that?" asked Mr. O'Donnell, almost involuntarily. "Who is what?" demanded his companion. That woman," was the reply. "What woman?" "There, are you blind? Seated on the bottom of the staircase. What is she doing?" persisted Mr. O'Donnell. "There is no woman near us," his companion answered, looking at the rising surgeon very much as though he suspected him of seeing double. "No woman?" scoffed Hertford. "Do you expect me to believe the evidence of my own eyes?" And he walked up to the figure, meaning to touch it. But as he essayed to do so, the woman seemed to rise in the air and float away with her arms stretched high up over her head, uttering such a wail of pain and agony and distress as caused the Irishman's blood to curdle. "My God, did you hear that?" he said to his companion. "What?" was the reply. Then, although he knew the sound had fallen on deaf ears, he answered, "The wail of the banshee! Some of my people are doomed." "I trust not," answered the house surgeon, who had an idea, nevertheless, that Hertford O'Donnell's banshee lived in a whiskey bottle, and would in some remote day make an end to the rising clever operator. With nerves utterly shaken, Mr. O'Donnell walked forward to the accident ward. There, with his face shaded from the light, lay his patient, a young boy with a compound fracture of the thigh. In that ward, in the face of actual danger or pain capable of relief, the surgeon had never known faltering or fear. And now he carefully examined the injury, felt the pulse, inquired as to the treatment pursued, and ordered the sufferer to be carried to the operating room. While he was looking out his instruments, he heard the boy lying on the table murmur faintly, "Tell her not to cry. Tell her not to cry." "What is he talking about?" Hertford O'Donnell inquired. "The nurse says he's been speaking about some woman crying ever since he came in. His mother, most likely," answered one of the attendants. "He's delirious," observed the surgeon. "No, sir," pleaded the boy excitedly. "No, it is that woman with the gray hair. I saw her looking from the upper window before the balcony gave way. She has never left me since, and she won't be quiet, wringing her hands and crying." "Can you see her now?" Hertford O'Donnell inquired, stepping to the side of the table. "Point out where she is." Then the lad stretched forth with a feeble finger in the direction of the door, where, clearly as he had seen her seated on the stairs, the surgeon saw a woman standing, a woman with gray hair and scanty clothing, and upstretched arms and bare feet. "A word with you, sir," O'Donnell said to the house surgeon, drawing him back from the table. "I cannot perform this operation. Send for some other person. I am ill. I am incapable." "But," pleaded the other, "there is no time to get anyone else. We sent for Mr. West before we troubled you, but he was out of town. and all the rest of the surgeons live so far away. Mortification may set in at any moment, and... Do you think you require to teach me my business? Was the reply. I know the boy's life hangs on a thread, and that is the very reason I cannot operate. I am not fit for it. I tell you, I have seen tonight that which unnerves me utterly. My hand is not steady. Send for someone else without delay. Say I am ill, dead. What you please. Heavens! There she is again, right over the little boy. Do you hear her? And Hertford O'Donnell fell fainting on the floor. How long he lay in that death-like swoon I cannot say. But when he returned to consciousness, the principal physician of Guy's was standing beside him in the cold grey light of the Christmas morning. The boy, murmured O'Donnell faintly. No, my dear fellow, keep yourself quiet, was the reply. The boy, he repeated irritably. Who operated? No one, Dr. Lanson answered. It would have been useless cruelty. Mortification had set in, and... Hertford O'Donnell turned his face to the wall, and his friend could not see it. Do not distress yourself, went on the physician kindly. Ellington says he could not have survived the operation in any case. He was quite delirious from the first, raving about a woman with grey hair, and... I know, Hertford O'Donnell interrupted. And the boy had a mother, they told me, or I dreamt it. Yes, she was bruised and shaken, but not seriously injured. Has she blue eyes and fair hair? Fair hair, all rippling and wavy? Is she white as a lily, with just a faint flush of color on her cheek? Is she young and trusting and innocent? No, I am wandering. She must be nearly 30 now. Go, for God's sake, and tell me if you can find a woman you could imagine having once been as a girl in such as I describe. Irish? Asked the doctor, and O'Donnell made a gesture of assent. Is it she, then? Was the reply. A woman with the face of an angel. A woman who should have been my wife, the surgeon answered, whose child was my son. Lord, help you! Then Hertford O'Donnell raised himself from the sofa where they had laid him and told his companion the story of his life. How there had been bitter feud between his people and her people, how they were divided by old animosities and by difference of religion, how they had met by stealth and exchanged rings and vows, all for naught, how his family had insulted hers, so that her father, wishing for her to marry a kinsman of his own, bore her off to a faraway land and made her write him a letter of eternal farewell. How his own parents had kept all knowledge of the quarrel from him till she was utterly beyond his reach. How they had vowed to discard him unless he agreed to marry according to their wishes. How he left home and came to London and sought his fortune. All this Hertford O'Donnell repeated, and when he had finished, the bells were ringing for morning service, ringing loudly, ringing joyfully, peace on earth, and goodwill towards men. But there was little peace that morning for Hertford O'Donnell. He had to look on the face of his dead son, wherein he beheld as though reflected the face of the boy in his dream. Afterwards, stealthily he followed his friend, and beheld with her eyes closed, her cheeks pale and pinched, her hair thinner but still falling like a veil over her, the love of his youth, the only woman he had ever loved devotedly, and unselfishly. There is little space left her to tell of how the two met at last, of how the stone of the years seemed suddenly rolled away from the tomb of their past, and their youth arose and returned to them, even amid their tears. She had been true to him, through persecution, through contumely, through kindness, which was more trying, through shame and grief and poverty. She had been loyal to the lover of her youth. And before the new year dawned, there came a letter from Calgillin saying that the banshee's wail had been heard there, and praying Hertford, if he were still alive, to let bygones be bygones in consideration of the long years of estrangement, the anguish and remorse of his afflicted parents. More than that, Hertford O'Donnell, if a reckless man, was honourable, and so on the Christmas day when he was to have proposed for Miss Inget, he went to that lady and told her how he had wooed and won in the years of his youth one who after many days was miraculously restored to him. And from the hour in which he took her into his confidence, he never thought her either vulgar or foolish, but rather he paid homage to the woman who, when she had heard the whole tale repeated, said simply, "Ask her to come to me till you can claim her, and God bless you both." And that was it. That was quite good. That was quite good. Yeah, Victoria, there's something about them. Something about them. All right, then. So now we move from warning to a journey, from a voice crying out in the darkness to a road lost beneath snow, and a coach that no traveler should ever board. A story of isolation, winter, and an encounter that lingers long after the journey ends. This is The Phantom Coach by Amelia B. Edwards. Now, this one was published in 1864. So, guys, I am going to pause the live for a moment. I got to go handle something, but I will be right back in less than a couple minutes. Alrighty. I am back. So, this one. We'll get in here. Oh. Alright. This one is called The Phantom Coach by Amelia B. Edwards. And as I said before I paused the live, I think so, it was originally published in 1864. The circumstances I am about to relate to you have truth Let's try that again. The circumstances I am about to relate to you have truth to recommend them. They happened to myself, and my recollection of them is as vivid as if they had taken place only yesterday. 20 years, however, have gone by since that night. During those 20 years I have told the story to but one other person. I tell it now with a reluctance which I find it difficult to overcome. All I entreat, meanwhile, is that you will abstain from forcing your own conclusions upon me. I want nothing explained away. I desire no arguments. My mind on this subject is quite made up. And, having the testimony of my own senses to rely upon, I prefer to abide by it. Well, it was just 20 years ago, and within a day or two of the end of the grouse season. I had been out all day with my gun, and had had no sport to speak of. The wind was due east, the month December, the place a bleak, wide moor in the far north of England, and I had lost my way. It was not a pleasant place in which to lose one's way. With the first feathery flakes of a coming snowstorm just fluttering down upon the heather, and the leaden evening closing in all around, I shaded my eyes with my hand and staled anxiously into the gathering darkness, where the purple moorland melted into a range of low hills some 10 or 12 miles distant. Not the faintest smoke wreath, not the tiniest cultivated patch or fence or sheep track met my eyes in any direction. There was nothing for it but to walk on, and take my chance of finding what shelter I could. Excuse me, holy shit. By the way, so I shouldered my gun again and pushed wearily forward, for I had been on foot since an hour after daybreak, and had eaten nothing since breakfast. Meanwhile the snow began to come down with ominous steadiness, and the wind fell. After this the cold became more intense, and the night came rapidly up. As for me, my prospects darkened with the darkening sky, and my heart grew heavy as I thought how my young wife was already watching for me through the window of our little inn parlor, and thought of all the suffering in store for her throughout this weary night. We had been married 4 months, and having spent our autumn in the Highlands, were now lodging in a remote little village situated just on the verge of the great English moorlands. We were very much in love, and, of course, very happy. This morning when we parted, she had implored me to return before dusk, and I had promised her that I would. What would I not have given to have kept my word? Even now, weary as I was, I felt that with a supper, an hour's rest, and a guide, I might still get back to her before midnight. If only guide and shelter could be found. And all this time the snow fell, and the night thickened. I stopped and shouted every now and then, but my shouts seemed only to make the silence deeper. Then a vague sense of uneasiness came upon me, and I began to remember stories of travelers who had walked on and on in the falling snow until, wearied out, they were fain to lie down and sleep their lives away. Would it be possible, I asked myself, to keep on thus through all the long dark night? Would there not come a time when my limbs must fail and my resolution give way? When I, too, must sleep the sleep of death? Death, I shuddered. How hard to die just now, when life lay all so bright before me. How hard for my darling, whose whole loving heart, but that thought is not to be borne. To banish it, I shouted again, louder and longer, and then listened eagerly. Was my shout answered, or did I fancy that I heard a far-off cry? I hallooed again, and again the echo followed. Then a wavering speck of light came suddenly out of the dark, shifting, disappearing, growing momentarily nearer and brighter. Running towards it at full speed, I found myself, to my great joy, face to face with an old man and a lantern. "Thank God!" was the exclamation that burst involuntarily from my lips. Blinking and frowning, he lifted his lantern and peered into my face. "What for?" growled he sulkily. "Well, for you. I began to fear I should be lost in the snow." Then folks do get cast away hereabouts fra time to time, and what's to hinder you from being cast away likewise, if the Lord's so minded?" "If the Lord is so minded that you and I shall be lost together, my friend, we must submit," I replied. "But I don't mean to be lost without you. How far am I away now from Dwalding?" "I go 20 mile, more or less." "And the nearest village?" "The nearest village is Wyke, and that's 12 mile t'other side." "Where do you live, then?" "Out yonder," he said, with a vague jerk of the lantern. "You're going home, I presume?" "Maybe I am." "Then I'm going with you." The old man shook his head and rubbed his nose reflectively with the handle of the lantern. "It ain't o' no use," he growled. "He won't let you in, not he." "We'll see about that," I replied briskly. "Who is he?" "The master." "Who is the master?" That's naught to you," was the unceremonious reply. Well, you lead the way, and I'll engage that master shall give me shelter and supper tonight." You can try him," muttered my reluctant guide, and still shaking his head, he hobbled gnome-like away through the falling snow. A large mass loomed up presently out of the darkness, and a huge dog rushed out, barking furiously. "Is this the house?" "Aye, it's the house. Down bay," and he fumbled in his pocket for the key. I drew up close to him, prepared to lose no chance of entrance, and saw, in the little circle of light shed by the lantern, that the door was heavily studded with iron nails, like the door of a prison. In another minute he had turned the key, and I had pushed past him into the house. Once inside, I looked round with curiosity, and found myself in a great raftered hall, which served apparently a variety of uses. One end was piled to the roof with corn, like a barn. The other was stored with flour sacks, agricultural implements, casks, and all kinds of miscellaneous lumber, while from beams overhead hung rows of hams, flitches, and bunches of dried herbs for winter use. In the center of the floor stood some huge object, gauntly dressed in a dingy wrapping cloth, and reaching half-way to the rafters. Lifting a corner of this cloth, I saw to my surprise a telescope of very considerable size, mounted on a rude, movable platform with 4 small wheels. The tube was made of painted wood, bound round with bands of metal rudely fashioned. The speculum, so far as I could estimate its size in the dim light, measured at least 15 inches in diameter. While I was yet examining the instrument and asking myself whether it was not the work of some self-taught optician, and a bell rang sharply. "That's for you," said my guide with a malicious grin. "Yonder's his room." He pointed to a low black door at the opposite side of the hall. I crossed over, rapped somewhat loudly, and went in, without waiting for an invitation. A huge, white-haired old man rose from a table covered with books and paper and confronted me sternly. "Who are you?" said he. "How came you here? What do you want?" "James Murray, barrister at law, on foot across the moor. Meat, drink, and sleep?" He bent his bushy brows into a portentous frown. "Mine is not a house of entertainment," he said haughtily. "Jacob, how dared you admit this stranger?" "I didn't admit him," grumbled the old man. "He followed me over the mirror and shouldered his way in before me. I'm no match for 6'2". "And pray, sir, by what right have you forced an entrance into my house?" "The same by which I should have clung to your boat if I were drowning. The right of self-preservation." "Self-preservation?" "There's an inch of snow on the ground already," I replied briefly, "and it would be deep enough to cover my body before daybreak." He strode to the window, pulled aside a heavy black curtain, and looked out. "It is true," he said. "You can stay, if you choose, till morning. Jacob, serve the supper." With this he waved me to a seat, resumed his own, and became at once absorbed in the studies from which I had disturbed him. I placed my gun in a corner, drew a chair to the hearth, and examined my quarters at leisure. Smaller and less incongruous in its arrangements than the hall, this room contained nevertheless much to waken my curiosity. The floor was carpetless. The whitewashed walls were in parts scrawled over with strange diagrams, and in others covered with shelves crowded with philosophical instruments, the uses of many of which were unknown to me. On one side of the fireplace stood a bookcase filled with dingy folios. On the other, a small organ, fantastically decorated with painted carvings of medieval saints and devils. Through the half-open door of a cupboard at the farther end of the room, I saw a long array of geological specimens, surgical preparations, crucibles, retorts, and jars of chemicals, while on the mantel-shelf beside me, amid a number of small objects, stood a model of the solar system, a small galvanic battery, and a microscope. Every chair had its burden. Every corner was heaped high with books. The very floor was littered over with maps, casts, papers, tracings, and learned lumber of all conceivable kinds. I stared about me with an amazement increased by every fresh object upon which my eyes chanced to rest. So strange a room I had never seen. Yet seemed it stranger still to find such a room in a lone farmhouse amid those wild and solitary moors. Over and over again I looked from my host to his surroundings, and from his surroundings back to my host, asking myself who and what he could be. His head was singularly fine, but it was more the head of a poet than of a philosopher, broad in the temples, prominent over the eyes, and clothed with a rough profusion of perfectly white hair. It had all the ideality and much of the ruggedness that characterizes the head of Louis van Beethoven. There were the same deep lines about the mouth and the same stern furrows in the brow. There was the same concentration of expression. While I was yet observing him, the door opened, and Jacob brought in the supper. His master then closed his book, rose, and with more courtesy of manner than he had yet shown, invited me to the table. A dish of ham and eggs, a loaf of brown bread, and a bottle of admirable sherry were placed before me.
"I have but the homeliest farmhouse fare to offer you, sir," said my entertainer. "Your appetite, I trust, will make up for the deficiencies of our larder." I had already fallen upon the viands, and now protested with the enthusiasm of a starving sportsman that I had never eaten anything so delicious. He bowed stiffly and sat down to his own supper, which consisted primitively of a jug of milk and a basin of porridge. We ate in silence, and when we had done, Jacob removed the tray. Then I drew my chair back to the fireside. My host, somewhat to my surprise, did the same, and turning abruptly towards me, said, "Sir, I have lived here in strict retirement for 23 years. During that time I have not seen as many strange faces, and I have not read a single newspaper. You are the first stranger who has crossed my threshold for more than 4 years. Will you favor me with a few words of information respecting that outer world from which I have parted company so long?"
"Pray interrogate me," I replied. "I am heartily at your service." "Hey, Towie, good to see you again." "I'm glad you're back. Of course, I don't think I've seen you since the last time you were in here a week ago or so. But it's good to see you." "Hello, Nerd Unleashed. You've been here all night. Oh, I'm sorry I didn't see you. I get so into reading I don't see a lot of the comments go by." "Don't worry, Yanni. Just keep telling yourself, it's only a story. It's only a story. It's only a story." He bent his head in acknowledgment, leaned forward with his elbows resting on his knees and his chin supported in the palms of his hands, stared fixedly into the fire, and proceeded to question me. His inquiries related chiefly to scientific matters, with the latter progress of which has applied to the practical purposes of life. He was almost wholly unacquainted. No student of science myself, I replied as well as my slight information permitted, but the task was far from easy, and I was much relieved when, passing from interrogation to discussion, he began pouring forth his own conclusions upon the facts which I had been attempting to place before him. He talked, and I listened spellbound. He talked till I believe he almost forgot my presence, and only thought aloud. I had never heard anything like it then. I have never heard anything like it since. Familiar with all systems of all philosophies, subtle in analysis, bold in generalization, he poured forth his thoughts in an uninterrupted stream, and, still leaning forward,
in the same moody attitude, with his eyes fixed upon the fire, wandering from topic to topic, from speculation to speculation, like an inspired dreamer, from practical science to mental philosophy, from electricity in the wire to electricity in the nerve, Watts to Mesmer, from Mesmer to Reichenbach, from Reichenbach to Swedenborg, Spinoza, Condillac, Descartes, Berkeley, Aristotle, Plato, and the Magi and mystics of the East, were transitions which, however bewildering in their variety and scope, seemed easy and harmonious upon his lips as sequences in music. By and by, I forget now by what link of conjecture and or illustration, he passed on to that field which lies beyond the boundary line of even conjectural philosophy, and reaches no man knows whither. He spoke of the soul and its aspirations, of the spirit and its powers, of the second sight, of prophecy, of those phenomena which, under the names of ghosts, spectres, and supernatural appearances, have been denied by the skeptics and attested by the credulous of all ages. "The world," he said, "grows hourly more and more skeptical of all that lies beyond its own narrow radius, and our men of science foster the fateful tendency. They condemn as fable all that resists experiment. They reject as false all that cannot be brought to the test of the laboratory or the dissecting room. Against what superstition have they waged so long and obstinate a war, as against the belief in apparitions? And yet, what superstition has maintained its hold upon the minds of men so long and so firmly? Show me any fact in physics, in history, in archaeology, which is supported by testimony so wide and various, attested by all races of men in all ages and in all climates, by the soberest sages of antiquity, by the rudest savage of today, by the Christian, the pagan, the pantheist, the materialist. This phenomena is treated as a nursery tale by the philosophers of our century. Circumstantial evidence weighs with them as a feather in the balance. The comparison of causes with effects, however valuable in physical science, is put aside as worthless and unreliable. The evidence of competent witnesses, however conclusive in a court of justice, counts for nothing. He who pauses before he pronounces is condemned as a trifler. He who believes is a dreamer or a fool." He spoke with bitterness, and having said thus, relapsed for some minutes into silence. Presently he raised his head from his hands, and added with an altered voice and manner, "I, sir, paused, investigated, believed, and was not ashamed to state my convictions to the world. I, too, was branded as a visionary, held up to ridicule by my contemporaries, and hooted from that field of science in which I had labored with honor during all the best years of my life. These things happened just 23 years ago. Since then, I have lived as you see me living now, and the world has forgotten me, as I have forgot the world. You have my history." "It is a very sad one," I murmured, scarcely knowing what to answer. "'Tis a very common one," he replied. "I have only suffered for the truth, as many a better and wiser man have suffered before me." He rose, as if desirous of ending the conversation, and went over to the window.
"It has ceased snowing," he observed as he dropped the curtain and came back to the fireside.
"Ceased!" I exclaimed, starting eagerly to my feet. "Oh, if it were only possible, but no, it is hopeless. Even if I could find my way across the moor, I could not walk 20 miles tonight."
"Walk 20 miles tonight," repeated my host. "What are you thinking of?"
"Of my wife," I replied impatiently. "Of my young wife, who does not know that I have lost my way, and who is at this moment breaking her heart with suspense and terror."
"Where is she?"
"At Dwolding, 20 miles away."
"At Dwolding," he echoed thoughtfully. "Yes, the distance, it is true, is 20 miles, but are you so very anxious to save the next 6 or 8 hours?"
"So very, very anxious that I would give 10 guineas at this moment for a guide and a horse."
"Your wish can be gratified at a less costly rate," he said, smiling. "The night mail from the north, which changes horses at Dwolding, passes within 5 miles of this spot, and will be due at a certain crossroad in about an hour and a quarter. If Jacob were to go with you across the moor and put you into the old coach road, you could find your way, I suppose, to where it joins the new one."
"Easily, gladly." He smiled again, rang the bell, gave the old servant his directions, and taking a bottle of whiskey and a wine-glass from the cupboard in which he kept his chemicals, said, "The snow lies deep, and it will be difficult walking tonight on the moor. A glass of uskbau before you start?" I would have declined the spirit, but he pressed it on me, and I drank it. It went down my throat like liquid flame, and almost took my breath away.
"It is strong," he said, "but it will help to keep out the cold, and now you have no moments to spare. Good night."
I thanked him for his hospitality, and would have shaken hands, but that he had turned away before I could finish my sentence. In another minute I had traversed the hall. Jacob had locked the outer door behind me, and we were out on the wide white moor. Although the wind had fallen, it was still bitterly cold. Not a star glimmered on the black vault overhead, not a sound save the rapid crunching of the snow beneath our feet disturbed the heavy stillness of the night. Jacob, not too well pleased with his mission, shambled on before in sullen silence, his lantern in his hand and his shadow at his feet. I followed, with my gun over my shoulder, as little inclined for conversation as himself. My thoughts were full of my late host. His voice yet rang in my ears, his eloquence yet held my imagination captive. I remember to this day with surprise how my overexcited brain retained whole sentences and parts of sentences, troops of brilliant images and fragments of splendid reasoning, the very words which he had uttered them. Musing thus over what I had heard and striving to recall a lost link here and there, I strode on at the heels of my guide, absorbed and unobservant. Presently, at the end, as it seemed to me, of only a few minutes, he came to a sudden halt and said, "Yon's your road. Keep the stone fence to your right, and you can't fail of the way." "This, then, is the old coach road?"
"Aye, 'tis the old coach road."
And how far do I go before I reach the crossroads?
Nigh upon 3 mile.
I pulled out my purse, and he became more communicative.
The roads are fair enough, he said, for foot passengers, but 'twas over steep and narrow for the northern traffic. You'll mind where the parapet's broken away. Close again the signpost. It's never been mended since the accident.
What accident?
The night mail pitched right over into the valley below, a good 50 feet and more, just at the worst bit of road in the whole country.
Horrible. Were many lives lost?
All. 4 were found dead, and t'other 2 died the next morning.
How long has it been since this happened?
Just 9 year.
Near the signpost, you say? I will bear it in mind. Good night.
Good night, sir, and thank you.
Jacob pocketed his half-crown and made a faint pretense of touching his hat and trudged back the way he had come. I watched the light of his lantern till it quite disappeared, and then turned to pursue my way alone. There was no longer a matter of the slightest difficulty, for, despite the dead darkness overhead, the line of stone fence showed distinctly enough against the pale gleam of the snow. How silent it seemed now, with only my footsteps to listen to. How silent and how solitary. A strange, disagreeable sense of loneliness stole over me. I walked faster. I hummed a fragment of a tune. I cast up enormous sums in my head and accumulated them at the compound interest. I did my best, in short, to forget the startling speculations to which I had but just been listening. And to some extent I succeeded. Meanwhile, the night air seemed to become colder and colder, and though I walked fast, I found it impossible to keep myself warm. My feet were like ice. I lost sensation in my hands and grasped my gun mechanically. I even breathed with difficulty, as though instead of traversing a quiet north country highway, I were scaling the uppermost heights of some gigantic Alp. This last symptom became presently so distressing that I was forced to stop for a few minutes and lean against the stone fence. As I did so, I chanced to look back up the road, and there, to my infinite relief, I saw a distant point of light, like the gleam of an approaching lantern. I at first concluded that Jacob had retraced his steps and followed me, but even as the conjecture presented itself, a second light flashed into sight, a light evidently parallel with the first, and approaching at the same rate of motion. It needed no second thought to show me that these must be the carriage lamps of some private vehicle, though it seemed strange that any private vehicle should take a road professedly disused and dangerous. There could be no doubt, however, of the fact, for the lamps grew larger and brighter every moment, and I even fancied I could already see the dark outline of the carriage between them. It was coming up very fast, and quite noiselessly, the snow being nearly a foot deep under the wheels. And now the body of the vehicle became distinctly visible behind the lamps. It looked strangely lofty. A sudden suspicion flashed upon me. Was it possible that I had passed the crossroads in the dark without observing the signpost? And could this be the very coach which I had come to meet? No need to ask myself that question a second time, for here it came round the bend of the road, guard and driver, one outside passenger, and 4 steaming grays, all wrapped in a soft haze of light through which the lamps blazed out like a pair of fiery meteors. I jumped forward, waved my hat, and shouted. The mail came down at full speed and passed me. For a moment I feared that I had not been seen or heard, but it was only for a moment. The coachman pulled up, the guard muffled to the eyes in capes and comforters, and apparently sound asleep, and the rumble neither answered my hail nor made the slightest effort to dismount. The outside passenger did not even turn his head. I opened the door for myself and looked in. There were but 3 travelers inside. So I stepped in, shut the door, slipped into the vacant corner, and congratulated myself on my good fortune. The atmosphere of the coach seemed, if possible, colder than that of the outer air, and was pervaded by a singularly damp and disagreeable smell. I looked round at my fellow passengers. They were all 3 men, and all silent. They did not seem to be asleep, but each leaned back in his corner of the vehicle as if absorbed in his own reflections. I attempted to open a conversation. "How intensely cold it is tonight," I said, addressing my opposite neighbor. He lifted his head, looked at me, but made no reply. "The winter," I added, "seems to have begun in earnest." Although the corner in which he sat was so dim that I could distinguish none of his features very clearly, I saw that his eyes were still turned full upon me, and yet he answered never a word. At any other time I should have felt and perhaps expressed some annoyance, but at the moment I felt it too ill to do either. The icy coldness of the night air had struck a chill to my very marrow, and the strange smell inside the coach was affecting me with an intolerable nausea. I shivered from head to foot, and turning to my left-hand neighbor, asked if he had any objection to an open window. He neither spoke nor stirred. I repeated the question somewhat more loudly, but with the same result. Then I lost patience and let the sash down. As I did so, the leather strap broke in my hand, and I observed that the glass was covered with a thick coat of mildew, the accumulation apparently of years. My attention being thus drawn to the condition of the coach, I examined it more narrowly, and saw by the uncertain light of the outer lamps that it was in the last stage of dilapidation. Every part of it was not only out of repair, but in a condition of decay. The sashes splintered at a touch, the leather fittings were crusted over with mold and literally rotting from the woodwork. The floor was almost breaking away beneath my feet. The whole machine, in short, was foul with damp and had evidently been dragged from some outhouse in which it had been mouldering away for years, to do another day or 2 of duty on the road. I turned to the 3rd passenger, whom I had not yet addressed, and hazarded one more remark. "This coach," I said, "is in a deplorable condition. The regular mail, I suppose, is under repair?" He moved his head slowly and looked me in the face without speaking a word. I shall never forget that look while I live. I turned cold at heart under it. I turn cold at heart even now when I recall it. His eyes glowed with a fiery, unnatural luster. His face was livid as the face of a corpse. His bloodless lips were drawn back as if in the agony of death, and showed the gleaming white teeth between. The words that I was about to utter died upon my lips, and a strange horror, a dreadful horror, came upon me. My sight had by this time become used to the gloom of the coach, and I could see with tolerable distinctness. I turned